Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. All we've talked about for this Ole Miss program, national championship, college football playoff appearance heading into 2024. For the Ole Miss fans, you're getting a college football playoff game. You're hosting a college football playoff game just a little bit earlier than I think you thought you would. Because you look at this matchup against Georgia and say, yeah, I think at first you looked at Georgia on your schedule and say, oh, that's going to be a tough game. Now it's a blessing for Ole Miss. Like, this is an opportunity for Ole Miss to show not only the national media, more importantly, the college football playoff committee, that this Ole Miss team is a college football playoff caliber team. And if they beat Georgia on Saturday, you look at the rest of the schedule, you go into your bye week, you go on the road at Florida, Mississippi State. If this team can get it done on Saturday, I think it's going to be really, really hard to keep this team out of the college football playoffs. Want to get into, a few keys to this football game, talk about some reasons that I think Ole Miss fans can be optimistic heading into this matchup. Now, you could point and look at Georgia and say, yeah, Georgia has looked rocky. Carson Beck has looked rocky over the last couple of weeks, but I would point at this Ole Miss team and say, what have you seen from them the last 2 weeks? The ceiling of this Ole Miss team, I don't know if there's a gap between the ceiling of Ole Miss and what Georgia can do. That's a different tune than we've sang the last couple of years where, look, Ole Miss has had really good teams. They were a really good football team in 2023. Nobody's arguing that, but there always felt like there was a gap between Ole Miss and Georgia, the two best versions of these teams. I'm not sure how big that gap is heading into this matchup. I want to get into a few key kind of talking points and things that we're going to be looking at, keys to the game, you might say, for this Ole Miss program. Now, before we get into it, as always, I think we'll start with just saying to the Ole Miss fans, can't thank y'all enough. This is kind of all we've talked about with Ole Miss going back to the month of January as we covered this team in the transfer portal, gearing up for a national championship run in 2024. The amount of support y'all have continued to show, it's been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear how the Ole Miss fans are feeling. What are the vibes for the Ole Miss fans heading into this matchup? Because I would say the optimism, it's got to be higher than it has been in the past with these kind of matchups. So would love to hear from you guys. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, we'll talk a little bit about what we've seen from Georgia, some things Ole Miss can do to get after Georgia. But I want to start with this Ole Miss offense. Now, for the Ole Miss fans who've been rocking with the boys for a while, we talked extensively about this Ole Miss offense just falling short of expectations early on in SEC play. There were a lot of problems with this Ole Miss offense. I think it started with just being far too reliant on wide receiver Trey Harris, but more importantly, being far too reliant on pushing the ball down the field and just taking vertical shots. You look at the two losses against LSU and Kentucky, go to that Kentucky game. I mean, you had 15 targets for Trey Harris. Your next leading pass catcher that was targeted only had 5, and I believe that was Henry Parrish at the running back position. And so, one, it just felt like Ole Miss's plan was Trey Harris or bust. And they weren't really understanding that you got some really good football players around Trey Harris as well that can go make some plays. I think secondly, it was just an over-reliance on pushing the ball down the field. I mean, Jackson Dart was 1 of 7, 20-plus yards down the field. If that vertical shot wasn't there for Ole Miss, which Kentucky did a really good job taking away, this offense really couldn't get anything going. Then you go to the LSU game, 3 of 12 on 20-plus yards down the field. We know Ole Miss wants to be explosive, but that can't be the extent of your offense. This offense is too talented. Lane Kiffin's too good of an offensive coach to be that one-dimensional on the offensive side of the football. They were far too reliant on vertically trying to push the ball down the field and hit explosive plays, kind of get it all in one play. Go back to the last two games against Arkansas, Oklahoma, two defenses that have been pretty damn solid in 2024. This wasn't playing Wake Forest and just doing whatever you wanted. These are SEC defenses that have performed quite well. Go back to Oklahoma. You were only 2 of 3, 20-plus yards down the field, but you were 7 of 10 between 10 and 20 yards down the field. That intermediate passing attack, attacking all portions of the football field. They didn't necessarily score 60 points against Oklahoma, but we said coming out of that game, that Ole Miss offense looked remarkably more healthy than it did against LSU and Kentucky in terms of how many different ways they could attack you. Then you go to the Arkansas game. That was peak Ole Miss offense, right? They were attacking vertically down the field. They were 5 of 6 on throws, 20 plus yards for over 280 yards. Shout out Jordan Watkins, but you're also 8 of 10 between 10 and 20 yards down the field. So 8 of 10 in that short intermediate passing range. Again, what you saw from Ole Miss was, and this is without Trey Harris. We're going to get to that in a second. We got a lot of different guys who can do a lot of different things. There's no reason for us to be a one-dimensional offense that's just relying on the vertical passing game. You've seen that the last 2 weeks now. I would expect to see Trey Harris back in this football game. Trey Harris is one of the best wide receivers in the country. The challenge for Ole Miss is, yeah, we have Trey Harris. We want to get him his touches. We want to have him as a focal piece, I should say, of this Ole Miss offense. But we're also recognizing we got a tight end in Daquan Wright that just ain't many guys that can deal with the physical traits he brings to the table. We got Caden Lee and Jordan Watkins who also can do some damage. We have Juice Wells, who I think is a top 10 wide receiver in the SEC, although hasn't played like it this year. Can you inject Trey Harris back into this Ole Miss offense, but not lose that multi-dimensional approach to this Ole Miss offense in terms of getting the football to everywhere in the field, attacking that intermediate passing attack? That's kind of the key for Ole Miss. Can you inject a game-changing weapon back into your offense, but continue to attack defenses like you have the last couple of weeks? If they can do that, this Ole Miss offense is going to be very, very difficult to stop. Now, you've changed the perspective here. You talk about this Ole Miss defense. I don't think the national media quite recognizes it yet. This is why this Ole Miss team is one of the most dangerous teams in the country. Yeah, we know Jackson Dart, Trey Harris, Lane Kiffin, that offense, coaching staff's good. The talent is really good. The storyline of this Ole Miss team has been how dominant this defense is, specifically in the front seven. There are two massive storylines in this football game, and it starts with stopping the run. This has largely been the differentiator between Ole Miss and teams like Georgia and Alabama. You just haven't had the guys in the front seven to really deal with the offensive lines that Georgia has trotted out. I think you have that this year. You take a look at Ole Miss stopping the run, 2.1 yards per carry allowed, the number one rushing defense in the country. They also lead the country in negative plays created. To me, it starts with stopping the run. You look at Carson Beck's struggles in 2024. I think it largely has to do with, one, losing Brock and Ladd. No question about that. I think secondly, Georgia hasn't run the football as dominantly and as efficiently as we've seen in the past. If you can stop the run, force Georgia into those second and third and long situations, not only does it help Ole Miss in terms of heating up Carson Beck, which we're going to talk about, it also limits the play action. And this is a massive storyline in the game. Play action is not very effective when you can't run the football well. Carson Beck's numbers for play action versus no play action. When Carson Beck's going to play action, which is about 35% of dropbacks, 70% completion percentage, 7 touchdowns, 1 interception. He's been the Carson Beck that we saw in 2023 when he's gone to play action. The storyline for Georgia, when Carson Beck's not off of play action, 62% completion percentage, 10 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. He's really struggled when he hasn't had that play action game to go to. Can Ole Miss stop the run and also stop Georgia from going to as much play action, make Carson Beck operate in situations he's not been very comfortable operating in to start 2024? And I think thirdly, heat up Carson Beck. And this is probably for my money, the best aspect of this Ole Miss defense. This pass rush is elite from all spots in the front seven. I mean, you talk about the interior defensive line, the injection of Walter Nolan, his pass rush win rate, but then you look at the outside, say Princely U, Jared Ivey's arguably been the best pass rusher on this team, Suntarian Perkins. You look at Carson Beck's numbers getting heated up. When Carson Beck's been under pressure this year, 36% completion percentage, 3 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. This is where he struggled. I mean, last year, Carson Beck was so good when he's kept clean, but he's also really good under pressure. This year, he struggled. He's turning the football over. He's throwing to underneath coverage and kind of just not seeing the field as effectively as he saw it in 2023. If Ole Miss can stop the run, get after the passer, the two things that they do the best on defense, I think it puts you in such a good spot to give this Georgia offense and Carson Beck a lot of problems. So we're heading into this football game. I think there's three keys. One, can you continue that offensive attack that is not just relying on taking that vertical shot? On defense, can you stop the run, limit the amount of times Georgia can go to play action? And when you get those third and long situations, can you get after Carson Beck? And it's not, yeah, you want to get negative plays. You want to sack the quarterback when you have your opportunity. Something Ole Miss has done very, very well in the 2024 year. But create some havoc, create some muddy pockets. That's probably the more important metric, is not necessarily the sack numbers, but the pass rush win rate, how much pressure you're getting on Carson Beck. If that number's high in this football game and you can get Carson Beck off a spot, that's when this Georgia offense has really struggled. And I think this is a really good matchup for Ole Miss. Again, previous years we had in this matchup and say, look, Ole Miss has a high flying offense. I think their opportunity to beat a team like Georgia in 2023 was just beating them in a shootout. This year they can play Georgia style football. Like, if Georgia wants to make this a little bit more of a muddy game, I think Ole Miss can strive. I think Ole Miss can thrive in that kind of game because of how good this defense is, specifically in the front seven. I think for Ole Miss fans, although it's been a roller coaster of a ride in 2024, this has to be the most comfortable and confident. Not comfortable. You ain't no comfortable when you play Georgia. I think we all know that. This has to be the most confident that this Ole Miss fan base has felt going into a matchup against Georgia. And I think that this is going to be a really good football game. And I think this is a must-win game for Ole Miss. If you don't win, you're not getting to the playoffs. This is an elimination college football playoff game. Can Lane Kiffin get it done? Going to be the best game that we see Saturday. I'm fired up for. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. We will certainly be instantly racked into this after the game. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.